Hello, class. This is Thursday, November 19th, I think. This is Latin 201, Professor Barbara Wyman. And today we're going to look at just a very small part of the grammar that Norma has thrown at us or y'all in chapter 22. And I'm going to talk about what we're going to do for the rest of the semester because obviously we're not going to be able to get quite as much done as if we were face to face. But so I want to give you an overview. So in chapter 22, we're going to ignore most of the grammar here, and the main grammar we're going to get is I'm going to talk a little bit about future active participles, which you've already learned. We're going to skip all this comparison of adjectives. That's really minor kind of stuff. The major thing that we're going to get is the infinitives. On section 126, we're going to talk about the infinitives in this chapter, and I'm going to come back to that. And the reason why we're going to learn all these different infinitives, of which, of course, Latin has a lot. Learn the participles first, and you come back and you use some of these participles to help form these infinitives, is because in chapter 23, our first real construction, advanced construction, is called indirect statement. And for indirect statement, you use the infinitive as the main verb. It's a little bit complicated, and I have a separate handout for you. Usually in class, we do lots of worksheets and we do lots of examples on the board. But for this this pandemic hurricane season, we're going to be introduced to indirect statement, and the next semester we'll have a good review of it. Here on page 215, that's next chapter. That's not the chapter we're going to do now, is how indirect statement works. It's our first complex construction in 201. And then normally in 201, we finish the semester learning subjunctive, which is actually one of the last constructions that you all have last verb forms that you all have left to learn. Because in Latin 201, typically we finish all Latin grammar, and then 202, we review it. But we're not going to get to subjunctive this semester just because it's pretty hard to learn from a book, and we'll do that in 202. Subjunctive is super important. The Romans use subjunctive a lot, and so it's a necessary thing to learn, but you have to learn the other stuff before subjunctive makes sense. So that is in chapter 24, which we are not going to do. I'm just showing you what subjunctive is, and we'll do that next semester. But we are going to cover the basics of indirect statement. And to get the basics of indirect statement, we have to learn the forms of the infinitive. So let me go back to, to chapter 22, which is where the infinitives are listed. So this is a really fun translation, The Death of Orpheus, when the Maenads pull him apart. One of Ovid's myths. There's lots of examples of not only all the different kind of participles and all your tenses. More than likely, your take-home test is going to come from this chapter, since it has a good representation of the more complex grammar that we've covered. So just a little FYI. So we're going to skip over to the next pages, and y'all can look through your vocab. I have noticed that some of you, when you're doing your translations, don't go to an online dictionary because for a lot of these words, it's easier just to go to Norma. Most of the words that are in the translations will either be listed in the chapter or in the back of the book. Makes it not quite so overwhelming. So it's a really long word list. Um, the starred words are the ones that are important or common that probably will be used later. So as you see, there's several of them now that aren't starred. On section 122, on page 193, Norma tells you a little bit more about the future active participle. We learned the form of that last chapter. It's really easy to form. It's just the PPP with the UR thrown in there. So instead of amatus aum, it's amatorus aum. And it means about to love, or in Louisiana, fixin' to love. So doctorus aum, fixin' to teach. Ductorus aum, fixin' to lead. Captorus aum, fixin' to take. Auditorus aum, fixin' to hear. And these participles are declined like bonus aum. So we're not going to worry too much about that. That's actually not very hard to form the future active participle, which are adjectives, okay? So Orpheus, fixing to sing, is killed by the crowd of women. Pretty exciting. So the women, they kill Orpheus about to sing. So it's just an adjective with this fixing to or about to. So future active participles are fun. And there's this little way they can be combined into a construction. You just translate the participle with the to be verb. But we're not going to worry about that. Actually, we're going to skip all this stuff in comparison of adverbs because there's endless lists in Latin to learn and memorize. And we usually go over this in class, but most of the time you can look these adjectives and adverbs up in a glossary or whatnot. So I'm not going to worry about the forms. We just skip over all that, and we are going to go to the infinitives. So infinitives, up until now, of course, we know the second principal part. So the amo, amare, amawi, amatum. And in one chapter, we learned that there is a passive infinitive, which is just the regular active infinitive. Instead of an E, you have an I. So amare means to love. Amari means to be loved. So those are infinitives. And as you see, there's active and passive infinitives, present, perfect, and future. And these infinitives can be used by themselves, like we have a complementary infinitive and used in a sentence. But a lot of the times these infinitives are going to be used in indirect statement, which we'll get next chapter. So just look at these infinitives. Amare, amari, and then there's the perfect infinitive, to have loved. And this is easy. It's the third principal part, amo, amare, amawi. With you whack off the I of the third principal part like we do for the perfect tense, and you add isse. So amawisse. Not hard to form. And then the perfect passive infinitive makes sense. It's the PPP, amatus, or it's amatus aum, and then the infinitive to be, amatus esse. So these are all infinitives, all right? And that means to have been loved. So don't worry about this making sense. Right now we're just looking at the forms. So here's the future infinitive. So this is why in this chapter the future participle is reviewed. So here's the future participle, future active participle because it's active. Amatorus aum plus esse. So that's the participle, and then when you connect it with the to be infinitive, it becomes the future active infinitive of amare. So amatorus esse means to be about to love. I know, crazy. And here, rarely used. Thanks for that, Norma. amatum iri, to be about, to be loved. So you really don't have to worry about this one right now, because the rest of these, it makes sense how they're formed. Amare, amari, third principal part, amalwise, and fourth principal part, amatus esse, future active participle, amatorus esse, and those are the infinitives, all the different infinitives. And so they really are not hard to form. So Norma gives you an example. Here's a second declension, tenere, teneri. Just remember to move that E and put the I instead. And so the third principal part, tenu isse, and then the fourth principal part plus to be, tentus esse, and then the future active participle plus to be, tentorus esse, and then tentum eri, which is what we're going to ignore. So it's really not hard. That's not even that much. Okay? And so this is the third IO, and fourth. These are a little different just because third and third IO, when we conjugate them, are a little bit different too, but still basically the same. You're making infinitives in all these different tenses: present, active and passive, perfect, active and passive, and future active and passive. And so in this chapter, they're not going to be used in indirect statement at all. All right? They're just going to be introduced as infinitive. So if we go back to mors orphei, I'm not even sure. I think Norma just wanted to give you practice with all these more complex things, like all the different participles. See a few superlatives in there. And then to introduce infinitives to you. Okay, so I think I have only assigned 1 or 2 paragraphs for you all to do on your, I can't even remember exactly what, but to do 1 or 2 paragraphs of chapter 22 so we can move on to chapter 23 and get indirect statement. All right.